OTP, or one-time pad, solves one of the most critical problems out there today in cybersecurity that unfortunately nobody knows they have, because it's not an area that's often focused on when we have breaches and common problems. In order to fully explain OTP, what it is and how it fits into the equation, we need to step back and look a little bit of the over area of cryptography. What is cryptography, how it works, and then we'll be able to see the magic of one-time pads and why not using one-time pads is such a big problem in cybersecurity today. Encryption is based on simple fundamental principles. Essentially, you take a message, which is anything plain text. So when I say message in this context, it's very generic. A Word document can be a message, an email can be a message, an Excel spreadsheet can be a message. So we're essentially taking a message, we're running it through a mathematical operation that's producing random output. And by nature, anything that's random lacks meaning, right? Randomness doesn't have any meaning. So it basically produces meaningless information. Now, at first, this might seem like magic or voodoo, but let's break it down a little more fundamental. A message in a computer, whether it's a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet, or an email, it's represented in the computer as a string of binary digits, zeros and ones. So essentially, if you looked at the raw file of, let's say, a Word document, it's stored and transmitted as just a bunch of binary data, just zeros and ones. Now, those zeros and ones, when you present them to Word.exe, has a special meaning, right? That it can go in and translate and produce something on the screen that's meaningful. But essentially, at its base level, it's really just a long string of numbers. So imagine you have a number and you do a mathematical operation on it, right? Whether you multiply it, square root, or do some operation you've learned about in school. That's all we're talking about here. You're taking a message, which is a number, you're running it through a mathematical operation, which is known as an encryption algorithm, and the mathematical operation is working in such a way that it's producing random output known as ciphertext. And if it's done correctly, that ciphertext is truly random, which is meaningless. So if anybody intercepts or gets my ciphertext, it's just a bunch of random data. If you take that random number and you present it to Word.exe, it's going to produce garbage because there's no meaning. So now your message is protected because you did a mathematical operation to produce the ciphertext. Now, if the ciphertext just existed and was irreversible, in terms of protecting messages that we want to read, that wouldn't be very helpful. So now we take that ciphertext, that string of random numbers, and we run it through another mathematical operation known as a decryption algorithm, and that then produces the original plain text message. So now we have our very, very basics of cryptography, and we have a couple more steps to go, but I just want to take it incrementally. So we take a message, which is a string of binary data that has meaning to some program. We run it through an encryption mathematical operation, and we produce random output, or a random string of numbers that has no meaning, known as ciphertext. Then we take the ciphertext, we run it through a decryption algorithm, another mathematical operation, and we get back the original message. Now, if we look at this basic concept that I explained, there's a fundamental flaw. And the fundamental flaw is this. If you have ciphertext and you want to be able to get back the original message, based on how I currently explained it, remember we're taking this in phases, how I currently explained it, if you had the decryption algorithm, you could decrypt any message. Now, here's the problem. Encryption and decryption algorithms do a lot of testing, validation, and are very, very hard to create. So we want to reuse them over and over again. The way I just explained it, you would have to have a unique encryption and decryption algorithm for every single person you were communicating with, because anybody who had the decryption algorithm could decrypt any ciphertext and get back the original message. Well, that's not really effective, and that wouldn't really work or scale. So they added another piece to the equation, and that piece is a cryptographic key. So now here's what happens. I take my message and I combine it with a unique key, which is just another number, in a mathematical operation. So imagine, and the mathematical operations of encryption and decryption are more complex than this, but think of it as 1 plus 1, right? 1 is our message, right? It's a number, plus another number, which is our key, and they get combined together in a unique way to now create our ciphertext. So now we're taking a message, a binary string of information that has meaning, and we're feeding it to an encryption algorithm that takes that along with a unique cryptographic key, combines them together in such a way that creates now our ciphertext, which once again is random output that doesn't have meaning. Now we would take that ciphertext, we would run it through a decryption algorithm with the key, and we'd get back our original message. Now our encryption and decryption algorithms can be public. Anybody can know them. Anybody can have access to them, as long as you keep the key protected and secure. And this is how it's done in the real world. If you've ever stayed at a hotel and you've walked along the floor, every single room in the hotel has the same lock. They're all identical locks. Imagine if the only way to protect the belongings in your room, every room had to have a unique special lock. Like, that wouldn't scale, right? If you have hundreds or thousands of rooms, that'd be insane. So what they do in a hotel, which is exactly what we do in crypto, is we go in and we put a same lock on every door, and then every person that checks in, we give them a unique key. So now it doesn't matter about the lock. As long as you have the key, you can get in the room. And if you don't have the key, you can't get in the room. So it's actually the protection of the key that ultimately keeps the belongings in your room safe. And that's the same concept with cryptography. You have encryption and decryption algorithms which are public and known that everyone has access to. And it's the key for each message that we want to keep safe, protected, and secure. So one of the key golden rules of cryptography is the secrecy of the ciphertext is based on the secrecy of the key, not the secrecy of the algorithm. And there's also many reasons for this. There's no way to prove an algorithm is secure. There's no way you can go in and mathematically perform a series of tests and say, this algorithm gets a 97 and this algorithm gets an 86. The only way to prove an algorithm is secure is by publicly disclosing it and letting really, really smart people beat on it for 8 or 10 years. That's why if you look at the algorithms that are out there that we're using, they've been out there for 15, 20, 30 years. This is why one of the other key rules with cryptography is you never ever want to trust proprietary algorithms. If somebody comes in and says, oh, we got this proprietary algorithm that nobody knows about, we haven't tested it, we haven't validated it, we haven't shown it to anybody, but trust us, it works, right? Grab small children and run, do not walk to the nearest exit, right? You want to go in and make sure that you have good, vetted, validated algorithms, which by nature, they need to be publicly disclosed. Now, I always have some people go, but Eric, if you're publicly disclosing an algorithm, wouldn't it make it easier for somebody to break? And the answer is absolutely not if it's done correctly. The way cryptography works is even if somebody has the algorithm, if it is built sound, valid, and robust, even with that algorithm, they wouldn't be able to break it if they don't have the key. It all comes down to the protection and secrecy and uniqueness of that key. If the key is properly protected and secure, we win. And if the key is not properly protected and secure, we lose. Now, this is something that's always puzzled me with all these big breaches that have happened. Whether we look at a large breach like Marriott, where 500 million records were compromised, or we look at a more recent attack like SolarWinds, where there was a supply chain attack that was able to access hundreds and thousands of sensitive documents. What I always go back to, and nobody ever talks about and covers, is all of that information was supposedly encrypted. Right? If you go back to the Marriott database, the Starwood database that they acquired, that database was supposedly encrypted. All of that sensitive data that was stolen from the government with SolarWinds, encrypted. So if you look at all these breaches, their attackers are stealing encrypted data. Now here's the issue. If it was encrypted correctly and the keys were properly protected, who cares? If somebody steals encrypted data but they don't have the key and it's proper encryption with proper key length, then no one's going to be able to decrypt that in any reasonable time frame. So who cares? It's sort of like breaking into a house and having all the valuables in a safe and you don't have the combination to the safe. You're not going to be, if you're a robber, you're not going to be able to sit there for 3 months and try to crack the safe because the homeowners are going to come home, right? You're not going to be able to effectively steal the information. So you look at all these breaches and you say, wait a second, how in the world are the attackers stealing encrypted data and being able to read it instantly? Clearly, they're not cracking the crypto. Nobody's that good. So the question is, what's going on? And what's going on is this. You have a sticky note with the combination to the safe stuck to the outside of the safe. So now when robbers break into your house, they're able to go in and get to the safe. There's a sticky note right there with the combination, and they use the combination. What's happening today is we're storing the cryptographic key with the data. It's stored on the same exact server that the data is, which means if you get to the server, you get to the data. So that's one of the fundamental flaws in what we're doing, is the key needs to be stored separately from the data. It needs to be a separate key that's not stored with your information. So now if you get to the data, you don't get the key. Now there's another big problem. And the other big problem is this. All of the data is encrypted with the same key. So now, if you break into the server, you get 500 million records, and the key is right there. One key gets you access to everything. So this would be like a hotel where every room had the same key. It'd be absurd, right? If we wouldn't do it in the real world, we shouldn't do it in cyberspace. And one of the things that happens, not only in cybersecurity, but in cryptography, is common sense is not common practice. So now we have the same exact key for every single piece of data. So now if you get to the server, you get one key, you have 500 million records. What we want to do is not only store the key on a separate server, but we also want to have a unique key for each message. We want to be much more similar to like what we have in a hotel, where now if you get into a hotel and you get a key, you get into one room. You don't get into 5 rooms, 50 rooms, or 5,000 rooms. You get into one single room. Same thing. Well, that's exactly what OTP or one-time pad does. The idea of OTP or a one-time pad is you have a unique key for every single message. So now, even if the attacker gets one key, they only get one record. If it's your room in a hotel and somebody gets the key, you might be a little pissed, right? But the owner of the hotel is still going to be happy, because if they have 1,000 rooms and somebody's only able to break one key, they only got into one of 1,000. So it's minimizing and reducing risk. Now, let me ask you a question. If the Marriott breach happened and the attackers got one key for one message and 1 out of 500 million records were compromised, 1 out of 500 million, do you think that would have been newsworthy? Do you think we would have heard about it? Do you think that would have been one of the biggest breaches in history? No, because controlling the damage, right? The goal of cybersecurity is not to prevent all attacks. The goal of cybersecurity is to control and minimize the damage. So OTP, one-time pad, solves one of the big challenges, which is every message has a unique key. So now if the attacker only steals one key, they only get one message. We're minimizing and lowering the key reuse. So that's one of the biggest problems we're solving. The next one is a key is a binary string of numbers. So the shorter the key, the easier it is to break. So one of the rules I always say is all keys are crackable. It's just a matter of time. Because you can eventually brute force any key. Now, it might take me 200 years, right? But it can be done. But here's the thing to keep in mind. Today, a long key might take me 200 years. But based on the advances that are happening out there in computing, that might, in 3 or 4 years, now be 2 or 3 months. So we always want to make sure that we have longer keys. Well, longer keys are also harder to manage. Well, the other solution that OTP solves is the key is the length of the message. So now, longer message, longer keys. So now you have really long keys. And even if for some crazy, crazy reason, if all the claims about quantum computing, which by the way, I always laugh because when I started working in this field 30 years ago, it was like, oh, in 2 years, quantum computing is going to break everything, make everything obsolete. And here we are 30 years later, and I'm hearing in 2 years, right? There's a lot more challenges. I won't go into quantum here because that's a whole nother series of talks. But I just want to mention that even if that did happen, which I think it's much farther out than people realize, is with one-time pads, OTPs, unique keys long, even if somebody is able to break one, you minimize, reduce the damage. Now, you're probably saying, okay, if the biggest problem that companies have today is key management and reusing keys and using the same key for everything and storing keys with the data, and OTP solves that, how come nobody's rolled it out? Well, it's complex, and the reason is this. Every time you create a new message, you create a new key. So this creates a key management nightmare, and there's special mathematical properties that a key must have. There's certain entropy principles that are required so a key can't easily be broken. So it's not like you're just going to take 011110011 and just that's a good key, right? There's a lot of test verification and validation that has to be done. So generating keys are hard, and then storing and managing those keys are very, very difficult. So if you're just going in and storing 100 records a day, that's 100 unique keys you have to have at your disposal. Now, here's the trick. You have to have the 100 keys, and the server or the person or the entity you're communicating with has to have those same exact keys. So correlating, managing, and syncing up those keys is very, very difficult. I remember when I worked at the CIA, and this was back in early 90s, right? Different time, different place. You didn't really have tablet computers, laptops, desktops, right? Very basic computing, and they were very, very, very limited. So we would use OTP, one-time pads, but they were often manually done. And the way it worked is if you went out into the field, you were given a book, we called it booklets, that was about 100 pages, and it had spiral around all 4 sides. So it was very tight spiral, which means you couldn't get in the middle and look at the next key or get access to the key, right? Because if somebody could, that would be really bad. So what you would do is you would take your pad and you'd rip off the first sheet because anyone saw that. And then that key that was on the next page, you would use that key to either encrypt or decrypt a message. And the person you were communicating with on the other end had to have the same exact pad and had to keep them consistent. If they ripped off 2 or 3 pages and you didn't, and your keys got out of sync, it wouldn't be able to work anymore. And the reason why it had to be bound all the way around is because what you did is you couldn't always carry it with you. So if I came back to my room, I would go in and take electrical current and basically put it on either end to make sure that nobody cut the wire. Because if somebody cut the wire, they could get into the information inside and see what the keys were. And as long as the wires weren't cut and it was very tightly bound, it was spiral. So as you took sheets off, it contracted. So you couldn't get inside. You couldn't look at other keys. And as you can imagine, very, very manually intensive, very logistically complex, and very, very error prone, right? If somebody ripped off 2 sheets, made a mistake or anything else. Now, if you're the CIA and in the 90s, you wanted to keep your information secure and protected, you would do that. But that's not practical. Imagine if you wanted to go in and you wanted to do secure communication with your bank. You want your banking records to be encrypted. So you have to go to your bank and they're going to give you a physical one-time pad. And then you have to go in and use that code each time. You have to type it in each time. There's a really long string. And then when you go to use it the next time, you have to rip the sheets off. And you have to make sure that whoever else is doing the banking rips the right sheets off. I mean, you could just see that's not going to work, right? It's just not a feasible solution. And even though there's computer programs that would try to do that, once again, it was not a feasible solution because there wasn't an easy, systematic way to generate keys for both sides and to be able to correlate and exchange it. So while technical people understood and knew the frustration, because there was no real solution for it, nobody really talked about it. So that's why you have cases where people are using encryption, they're rolling out keys, and it's silliness. It's like you getting a safe for your house and leaving the front door unlocked and the safe open. It's giving you a false sense of security, right? So today, cryptography is failing. And it's failing because we're using the same key for all of our data and storing it in one location. And it's easy for the attacker to get and not properly protect it. So we need to go in and generate unique keys every single time for every single message, one-time pad, not store them with the data, and have an easy way to manage and roll it out. And one of the reasons I'm so excited is up until recently, we knew about the problem, technology people did, but there was no solution that we could offer to our customers. There is a solution. Figured out not only how to generate one-time pads in an easy, scalable manner, but they also figured out how to integrate it at both a consumer and a business level. So now if you're running a business, you have a way that you can communicate with other businesses to be able to generate one-time pads on the fly, utilize, manage, and make sure they're good, robust, secure keys. Which revelize an OTP, which is make it scalable, make it integratable, and make it be able to work with both clients, servers, and businesses in an easy, scalable manner. So now we have a solution to this number one problem. And the best part about using OTP or one-time pads is, even if for some reason a client mishandles, misuses, or gives somebody a key, it doesn't matter. The attackers only have one message, one entry, one component. Because the key is always changing, it's a great way to be able to minimize the risk. So to me, we've had a problem for a long time that people have been ignoring because there was no solution. Now we have a solution to one of the biggest problems out there. And here's why I say that. Let's go back to the Marriott breach. The Marriott breach, everyone says, happened because there was a server accessible from the internet that wasn't patched for multiple years that contained critical data that wasn't properly encrypted. Now check this out. If the data on that server was encrypted with one-time pad solutions, even if the server wasn't patched, even if the server was vulnerable, even if the attackers got in, they would have basically got a bunch of encrypted data. And because the keys are not stored on that server, the attacker would have no keys. And even if they tried brute forcing it, it would have taken hundreds of years. And even if they did and they broke one key, they would have got one record. So they would have had to go in, if it was 500 million records, they would have had to break 500 million keys. Not going to happen in any lifetime, even if you have quantum computing in place. So essentially imagine a robber breaks into a house, and when they walk in the house, there's safes everywhere, because every single valuable is stored in a separate safe with a separate combination. Any reasonable robber out there is going to look at that. They're going to walk out and rob somebody else, right? There's no way they're going to even attempt to try to even crack one safe, recognizing if they do, they're going to get very, very little value because every single one is in a different place. It now goes in and protects each record. The keys are not stored with the server. Each record has a unique key, and each key is very, 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 very robust, which is very, very difficult to break. So finally, now we have a solution. And here's the cool part. If data is stolen but properly encrypted with proper keys, there's no disclosure requirement. The only reason Marriott had a disclosure requirement is because the keys were stored with the data and the attacker got the data. So not only does this solve a huge legal issue with disclosure, which is very, very expensive, it protects and secures the data. I hope you found this valuable, but just summarizing, remember the problem with crypto is the secrecy of the ciphertext is only as secure as the secrecy of the key and the robustness of the key. We want to have a unique key for every single message. We want it long, we want it robust, we want it stored in a separate location. Utilizing one-time pads does, it solves all the current problems and challenges we have with cryptography.